is give you some information about the program and make sure you understand what we're looking to accomplish. We're actually joined today by Karan Robinson and Nick Tennant in terms of other speakers that are going to be presenting the content for the next 6 weeks. And what you see on your screen is our agenda. So for our agenda, and if you're just tuning in here, if you go ahead and just hit mute for us kindly, and that'll be much appreciated. For the next 6 weeks, we're going to be covering all aspects of heart disease prevention. Today, Nick is going to walk you through a little bit behind the scenes in terms of some of the signs and symptoms of a heart attack, as well as some of the factors that play a role in predicting our risk for heart disease and stroke. Next week, our wellness coordinator, Karan Robinson, will talk to you about the science of habit formation. You know, much of what we do in life is really based on routine habits. So she's going to share with you some tips to help build healthier habits and give you some ideas to help figure out what areas of your lives you should try to focus some energy on as we look to make a measurable improvement in your risk for heart disease. After that, we're going to dive into food, and I'll be talking to you about some of the basics of nutrition as well as weight control. A lot of confusion still exists out there as far as what's going to be the best approach to achieve a healthier weight. So I'm going to share with you what the evidence is suggesting in terms of healthier eating, and also remind you that we all have a different healthy diet. The best diet for you is going to be one that's going to help you achieve your health outcomes, but also be sustainable. And it could be different for everybody. So I'm going to try to simplify some of the confusion that exists with nutrition. Also, for those of you that are managing high cholesterol or high blood pressure, might be on some medications, we are fortunate enough to also be joined by Rachel Carloni. She is our pharmacist here in Jacksonville that works with a lot of our educational programs. So she's going to put together a presentation that talks about all the different medications used to help reduce the risk of heart disease, but also give you some good resources at saving money on your prescription drugs, as well as answer any questions that you might have about medications designed to control high blood pressure as well as high cholesterol. We're also going to spend some time talking about stress. You know, raise your hand if you had to deal with some type of stress in the past year and a half. Yes, that's everybody. Everybody's raising their hand. And stress can be a very, very powerful risk factor for heart disease. And it's not easily managed, but there are some things that we can do as individuals that can help you lower your risk for heart disease by targeting some of those things and helping you manage your stress. Lastly, we're going to wrap up and talk about physical activity and its role for heart disease prevention. What are some of the minimum recommendations for achieving physical activity? And then also talk about goal setting. It's important that everyone here is establishing a particular goal once they finish this program. Yes, it's nice to hear good information about all the different aspects of heart disease prevention, but we also want you to leave here with some goal in mind of what you want to do. Maybe it's looking at the amount of physical activity you get, or maybe it's some avenues to help channel some of the stressors in your life, or maybe it's something about nutrition. So I want to make sure you leave here with some actionable goal, and that we are going to talk with you about that one-on-one. So as part of this program, you're going to meet with a health coach. We'll give you the option to do it virtually if you're in Gainesville and Jacksonville, or if you're available to come to our office in Jacksonville, you have that option too. But we just want to make sure that each one of you that are tuning in today receives some one-on-one attention. So that way we can make sure that whatever goals you may be setting for yourself is something that's going to be realistic and achievable, but also try to connect you with some resources and support to help you along the way. Now, for those of you that are part of our GatorCare insurance plan here in Jacksonville, this particular program, once you complete it, is going to be worth 100 points towards your wellness credit. One of the ways in which we track that is through regular attendance records. And the best way to do that is after each class, we're going to send you a real brief quiz. It's an open book quiz, but we use this quiz as a way to track attendance. every class that we have, every class you see on the schedule on your screen is also being recorded. So if you can't make a specific date, you can tune in at a later date at your convenience and figure, what's going to be the best route for you in terms of finding each of those classes. So I am now going to turn it over to Nick. If you have a question, feel free to type it in the chat. I'm going to be manning the chat while Nick takes over the remainder of your presentation. Miss Allen, I see your hand raised. So if you want a specific question for me, you can type it in the chat and I'd be happy to assist you. But Nick, it's all yours.
Thank you, John, and thank you everyone for joining us in this class number 1. And just as a caveat before we begin, if you are in Gainesville and you participate in the
here's your
awards program there.
Are you going to take this to?
I can drop it to Joe if you want me to.
Okay. Sorry. So if you're in Gainesville and you participate in your wellness program there, that in which you accrue points, check with your wellness office. This is an eligible activity. I'm not sure how many points they're going to give for you all. So check with your wellness office, check with them, and they can give you the correct details on how many points you will get for this course. So while we begin, I want to start a little differently. So what I'm going to ask you all to do is get a little involved in this presentation. I want to make it more interactive. So we're going to play a little game of myth or fact. So in the chat box, as we go throughout, you're not going to get points off. You're only going to get 50 points if you get it wrong or something like that. It's just simply a myth or a fact. I want you to type in the chat what you think the answer is. So the first one we have, myth or a fact. Your heart needs 1 straight hour of exercise every day. Do you think that's a myth or a fact? And go ahead and type it in chat. I'll give everyone a few minutes to answer. A lot of myths. Good job. You are correct. It is a myth. Now, while exercise definitely helps our heart and our overall health, when we're looking at our total number that we should be aiming for, research shows that's 150 minutes of moderate physical activity each week. So you're looking at about 30 minutes each day, and that doesn't even have to be consecutive. So for instance, if you can't fit in your 30 minutes each day, you can break them up into 3 10-minute segments. So you can go for 3 10-minute brisk walks throughout the day, and that will accrue to your 30 minutes each day, which you need 150 minutes of moderate physical activity. So you are correct. That is a myth. The next one, myth or fact. Fiber can lower your cholesterol. Is that a myth or a fact? What do you all think? A lot of facts, myths. We got some variation in there. Thank you all for participating and interacting. That is actually a fact. So good job for all of you that answered fact, and no shame if you answered myth. When I read this, it can be kind of tricky when you say fiber can lower your cholesterol, thinking that may be the only factor, but while other things can help lower your cholesterol, fiber, dietary fiber, specifically soluble fiber, you'll find that and John, correct me if I'm wrong, you'll find that mostly in your beans, your oats, apples, plums, things like that, actually binds to cholesterol and helps carry it out of the body. So fiber can actually improve our cholesterol overall. All right, going to the next one, myth or fact, heart disease kills more women than breast cancer. Do you think that's a myth or a fact? I feel like we have a pretty smart audience here. That is a fact, and you'll see later in this presentation just how prevalent heart disease is and how big of how many deaths are attributed to some form of heart disease, but 50% of death can be attributed to some form of cardiovascular disease. So it greatly outnumbers any of the other leading causes of death. All right, going to the next one. Myth or fact, you get high cholesterol just because of what you eat. You get high cholesterol just because of what you eat. Is that a myth or a fact? See, I know a lot of y'all are probably using the same technique I used in school. When they use that context clue and you hear that just because, you probably go, and you would be right. That is myth. So there's a lot of factors that go into high cholesterol, and we talked about that, and I'll go into that in more detail in this presentation. Diet does have a big influence on our cholesterol, but so does our weight, age, our physical activity. So how much are we getting that recommended physical activity each day? So there's a lot of factors that can influence our cholesterol. So just what we eat is not the only factor that goes into our cholesterol. So myth or fact, you should cut back on salt intake for heart health. Is that a myth or a fact? It's a lot of facts. Yeah, see, we got a smart audience. You guys should be teaching this course. That is a fact. And this is something I probably struggle with too, because I have hypertension and I prefer those salty foods over the sweet foods. And sodium is hidden in a lot of our foods. And if we go out to eat, we're typically going to have more sodium in our food because restaurants are a business. They're trying to sell food, and salt helps make it taste a lot better. So when we think about, there isn't necessarily a specific number, but we should try to keep it under around 2,000 milligrams per day. So that's how much salt intake we should be taking. So cutting back on salt overall in our diet improves our overall health no matter what. All right. Myth or fact, being obese is the biggest risk factor for heart disease. Is that a myth or a fact? Being obese is the biggest risk factor for heart disease. All right, got some variation in here. I love when I see that. That is actually a myth. So a lot of factors, again, go into heart disease, and you'll hear about those today. But the biggest risk factors seem to be hypertension and our use of tobacco. So how much tobacco we're using on a daily basis. And we'll go into all the different risk factors and how prevalent they are. But overall, what we see is hypertension and tobacco use as the biggest risk factor for heart disease. All right, last one. Myth or fact, to lower chances of heart disease, even non-drinkers should drink red wine. Is that a myth or a fact? Is that a myth or a fact? To lower chances of heart disease, even non-drinkers should drink red wine. Now, while I know a lot of you are hoping this is a fact, it is actually a myth. So even myself, I enjoy the red wine as well. And while there are some studies that show that it could help, there's really not enough data to say that if you aren't already drinking to then go ahead and start drinking. So what we really see is that over drinking or the overconsumption of alcohol actually increases our risk for certain diseases, including heart disease. So we want to make sure we watch the amount of alcohol we consume. So that's usually 1 drink per day for women and 2 for men. And unfortunately, no, you cannot bank them until the weekend. You can't save up all your drinks and say, hey, I can have 10 drinks on the weekend. So that is not how it works. So that is a myth. So I appreciate you all staying engaged and getting into the lecture. So we're going to go ahead and meet our heart. So your heart is about the size of your fist. So if you ball up your hand into the size of a fist, that is about the size of your heart. So your heart works like a pump of the body. And so what it does is it has 4 chambers that help distribute blood to the tissues throughout our body. And it's pumping approximately 2,000 gallons of blood each day. But that pump, that fist that you have, that pump is impacted by how well those arteries are functioning. So over time, that can be impacted by some of those risk factors we're going to talk about, like physical inactivity, poor diet, and tobacco use. So normal heart function, when we speak about normal heart function, the task of your heart, remember, is to pump enough blood to deliver a continuous supply of oxygen and other nutrients to the brain and other vital organs. So a lot of you may already know this, but I wanted to get some backgrounds on the basic functions of the heart. And before we continue, so what I'm going to do now is just stop this share and share this short video with you all. All right, give me 1 second.
Your heart is a pump. It's a muscular organ about the size of your fist and is located slightly left of center in your chest. Your heart is divided into the right and left side. The division protects oxygen-rich blood from mixing with oxygen-poor blood. Together, your heart and blood vessels comprise your cardiovascular system, which circulates blood and oxygen around your body. In fact, your heart pumps about 5 quarts of blood every minute, and it beats about 100,000 times in one day. That's about 35 million times in a year. Oxygen-poor blood, blue blood, returns to the heart after circulating through your body. The right side of the heart, composed of the right atrium and ventricle, collects and pumps the blood to the lungs through the pulmonary arteries. The lungs refresh the blood with a new supply of oxygen, making it turn red. Oxygen-rich blood, red blood, then enters the left side of the heart, composed of the left atrium and ventricle, and is pumped through the aorta to the body to supply tissues with oxygen. 4 valves within your heart keep your blood moving the right way. The tricuspid, mitral, pulmonary, and aortic valves work like gates on a fence. They open only one way and only when pushed on. Each valve opens and closes once per heartbeat, or about once every second. A beating heart contracts and relaxes. Contraction is called systole, and relaxing is called diastole. During systole, your ventricles contract, forcing blood into the vessels going to your lungs and body, much like ketchup being forced out of a squeeze bottle. The right ventricle contracts a little bit before the left ventricle does. Your ventricles then relax during diastole and are filled with blood coming from the upper chambers, the left and right atria. Then the cycle starts over again. Your heart is nourished by blood too. Blood vessels called coronary arteries extend over the surface of your heart and branch into smaller capillaries. Here you can see just the network of blood vessels that feed your heart with oxygen-rich blood. Your heart also has electrical wiring, which keeps it beating. Electrical impulses begin high in the right atrium and travel through specialized pathways to the ventricles, delivering the signal to pump. The conduction system keeps your heart beating in a coordinated and normal rhythm, which in turn keeps blood circulating. The continuous exchange of oxygen-rich blood with oxygen-poor blood is what keeps you alive.
All right, so let's give you some background on the heart and how it functions. So give me one second. Let me share my screen again for you all. All right, and so now we're going to move on to my favorite word to say because I usually butcher it, at least half the time. Atherosclerosis. So it's a tongue twister for me, but it's the buildup of fats and cholesterol and other substances in and around our artery walls. And there's typically no symptoms until an artery is so narrowed or clogged that it can't supply adequate blood to your organs and tissues. So you usually start to see this form in our early adulthood, and gradually it starts to build up, and it actually increases our risk of heart attack and stroke. And it's greatly influenced by our lifestyle choices and factors. So things that we can control. When we'll talk about making some of those behavior modifications throughout this program, we're going to talk about taking some of those lifestyle risks that we have, some of those behavior changes that we want to make, and applying them in our lives. So what actually happens during a heart attack? Well, Elizabeth Banks did a great promo video for Go Red for Women that talks about the symptoms of a heart attack. So give me one second, I'll share this for you guys.
It started out like a totally normal day. Okay, move objection deadline to the third line after survey. Oh, honey, for when you always use the verb estar. What are you doing down there? Did you finish your breakfast? Ow. Whew. Don't hit your brother. Honey, you have to eat something. Here. Okay, 5 minutes to carpool. Where's my coffee?
You okay, Mom?
Oh, I'm fine. Sandwich orders. What do you want?
Almond butter and jelly.
Spaghetti.
You sure you're okay?
I'm fine, sweetie.
I am so late. Hey, buddy, how you doing? Hey, honey. You okay?
Yeah, I'm fine.
You sure?
Oh, yeah. Here.
Acai, my favorite. See you guys later.
Wear your shoes. Put your shoes back on, please. You know, go help your sister. We're going in 3 minutes. Oh my God, what am I doing? I forgot to cut off the crust. Voila. Shoes on, potty if you need it. Honey, get your sister. Okay, get her. Nobody move. I'm getting a dustpan.
Mom! I think you're having a heart attack.
Honey, do I look like the type of person who has a heart attack? I'm just gonna sit down. I'm totally fine. Don't forget to wear the high socks with the shin guards.
Forget about the shin guards, Mom.
Come on, Mrs. Underdog is not gonna wait. Whoa. Okay. 9, 1, 1. Hi, sorry to bother you. I think I might be having a little heart attack. Nothing really, just some nausea, tightening of the jaw, dizziness, shortness of breath, muscle pain, achiness, this terrible pressure in my chest. Oh, really? They can be here in how long? 2 minutes. Can you make it 10? I thought I had gas. Turns out I was having a heart attack. Heart disease is the #1 killer of American women. So now I take care of my heart and I tell the women in my life to do the same.
Sounds great, by the way.
That's nice, sweetie, but that's not my heart. That is. Make it your mission to save your life and the lives of the women you love. Find out more from the American Heart Association at goredforwomen.org.
Right. So I always have a hard time not laughing with Elizabeth Banks, but it's a great video. It shows you the symptoms that you can have, that kind of the telltale signs before or while you're having the heart attack. So it's important to pay attention to those things. You know, before watching some of these videos, a lot of people may not have known some of the symptoms that they may have been feeling at the time. So this is an important video, and I thought it was a good one to share with you all. When we talk about stroke, this is a disease that affects the arteries leading to and within a brain, and it's one of the leading causes of disability in the United States. So it occurs when a blood vessel to the brain is either blocked by a clot or burst, so the brain can't get the blood and oxygen it needs. So if a clot blocks a blood vessel that feeds the heart, that's what that can cause a heart attack. If it blocks a blood vessel that feeds the brain, that's what causes the stroke. So when we talk about heart disease and stroke, you can see how the atherosclerosis and things like that can actually lend to, when we not taking care of our arteries, not with the proper nutrition, the right amount of physical activities, that can lead to our heart disease and stroke. So it has a lot to do with the lifestyle choices that we make. Now, I mentioned earlier and in the myth and fact section about heart disease and how it's one of the leading causes of death. So I think this graph does a great job about just showing the sheer amount of deaths compared to other symptoms or other causes of deaths. So when you look at the big yellow circle that you see on your screen, that's your heart and circulatory disorders. So there's your cardiovascular diseases. When you look at all the way down the line, look how big it is in comparison to other items. So if you compare it to things like, you know, diabetes or murder or infections, things like that, heart disease is one of the most prevalent leading causes of death. So we see that a lot, and we often I don't think we hear people talk about it as much. You know, you don't hear heart disease on the news all the time. You hear about the murder or something like that, but heart disease claims a lot of life. So it's important to look at just the sheer prevalence we see as leading causes of death is heart disease. And when we look at the map of the United States and where heart disease is really, and the death rates are really prominent, you can see the deep red is really in that south or the southeast, right? What is considered the south of the United States. So if you took this, I mean, while death rates have started to decrease, they still are higher in the southeast. So, I mean, we do see some signs of progress But when you look at the South compared to the rest of the United States, you can see that it's really, really prominent. Now, that could be due to a lot of factors. It could be our diet choices. The South is known for a lot of fried foods. It could be our socioeconomic status, our physical inactivity. So, are we getting that recommended amount of physical activity each day or each week? Are we our age, gender, things like that? All those things can influence this. But what we see is that the South is leading the United States. So what we want to do is take some of these chance or the choices that we can make, things that we can impact, and start making those changes in our lives. So what are the risk factors for heart disease? Well, as I mentioned, there are a lot. So you could have a family history of it. So you could have genetics that can cause that. Age, high blood pressure. We talked about high blood pressure and smoking being, or tobacco use as being some of the biggest risk factors for heart disease. High blood lipids. So if you have high cholesterol, diabetes, our gender, physical inactivity. We talked about that, getting that 150 minutes, obesity, stress, poor diet. So while there are some things that are not modifiable, things that we can't really change, maybe we can't change our family history or our age, but we can work on ways to help reduce our stress. We can work on ways to modify our diet. We can work on ways to increase our physical activity, all these things that we can change. So we're going to look throughout this program to make those behavior changes. What can we do in our lives to help decrease our risk for heart disease? So how prevalent are these risk factors overall? And if you look on the graph, you can see, or the chart here, excuse me, you can see that smoking is about 15.5%. And you go on down the list, hypertension is at 45.5%. So if you look at this chart, what would you say the most prevalent risk factor is? Now, you may look at it and just glance at it and look at the percentage and say, well, it looks like hypertension is the most prevalent risk factor. But if you go down to the last one that says recommended exercise at 22.5%, well, if only 22.5% are getting the recommended amount of exercise, what that means is 77.5% are not getting the recommended amount of physical activity or exercise. So what you see here is actually that is the most prevalent risk factor. And while that is, it could be bad in its own right, that is something that we have control over, something that we can change. So when we talk about our recommended exercise and getting that 150 minutes, Karan will go into detail about that later in the program and some of the ways we can rethink physical activity. Doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go run a marathon every day. Like I said, even getting those 30-minute walks in, or 10-minute walks each day, that can go a long way in improving your health. When we talk about our lipid panels and our lipid levels, so when we, for our Jacksonville folks, we are going to have on-site screenings. We will only have 1 week of them. That is not going to be a requirement for your wellness credit. So you do not have to go get it. If it's a situation where you just want to get your numbers checked and things like that, you're more than welcome to come down there for it. John, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm going off the top of my head. I believe it's the week September 13th through the 16th. So it's going to be a Monday through Thursday. We'll have a few dates at the North as well, but you'll also have the opportunity to go to any Quest location for free as well to get that screening done. Again, it's not a mandatory or required activity for the wellness credit. It is just simply going to be an additional activity you can get. But if you're used to going there or getting your lipids done, maybe through your primary care physician, you probably are used to seeing your cholesterol levels. So, when we talk about our HDL, that makes up 20 to 30% of our total cholesterol. And that's what you hear as the quote unquote good cholesterol. That's the one you want to see as a higher number typically. And that moves cholesterol from the arteries to the liver. Now, when we talk about our LDL, and this makes up 60 to 70% of our total cholesterol. And that's the main form of quote unquote bad cholesterol. And that can cause the buildup with inside our arteries, and that can help or can increase our chances of the heart attacks and the strokes. So when we look at our LDL versus our HDL, if we can keep our LDL in range, it can go a long way to reducing our risk. And John used a great analogy that I wanted to share with you all, and it's think of HDL as a Pac-Man. For those of us that played Pac-Man at any point in our lives, or at least know that reference, think of HDL as the Pac-Man and the LDL as all those little dots. So the more HDL you have, the more it can gobble up those little dots of LDL. So we're looking at ways of increasing our HDL while decreasing our LDL. And this graph on your screen here, it gives you a lot of information. There's a lot of data on this screen. But really the take-home message I want you to get from this is as you move from left to right on the graph, the LDL increases and so does the hardening of the arteries. So again, if we can keep our LDL in range, it can go a long way in reducing our risk of atherosclerosis and keeping the blood vessels healthy. Blood pressure numbers. So these are the new standards. So now 130 as your systolic blood pressure is considered high blood pressure. So if you get a 130 reading, that is considered high blood pressure. So you can see based off these numbers from stage 1 on, so on down the list, you just have to either meet either or systolic or diastolic to get classified as hypertension or high blood pressure. And it's really, hypertension is known as a silent killer because we can go throughout our day and not even know we had high blood pressure or have high blood pressure. I'm a living example of that. I didn't know I had high blood pressure until about, I think 5 years ago now, maybe 6 years ago at a health screening. I had no idea. I was going throughout my day, not feeling any effects of it necessarily. Took my blood pressure reading. It was 169 over 70 something. I had high blood pressure. Had never known it in my life. After researching, I found out my family, I have a long family history of it. There's other factors that played into it, but it's important to get those numbers checked and to continue with our home monitoring if you can. So even buying, a simple $20, $25 home blood pressure monitor that you can check and keep continuously checking that to make sure your blood pressure is in range, staying on top of our medications if we're using those, keeping up with our doctor visits and our specialist visits. And the thing to remember is just because you can't use that excuse like it's always high, it's going to be high because it's always high. It's no big deal. Well, that's not a valid excuse. Just because it's always high doesn't mean it's a good thing. We want to look at ways we can help reduce that high number so it's not always high. And that's the main purpose of this program, to look at lifestyle and behavior changes we can make to improve our overall health. On the screen here, this is a simple way that you can calculate your BMI. So if you look on the x-axis there, you can see your weight in pounds, and on the y, you have your height. So you just look at your height and your weight and you can find your BMI. It's really just a person's weight in kilograms divided by his or her height in meters squared. But this, we converted it here, so it's actually feet and inches as height and weight is in pounds there. So you can actually figure that out for yourself. Now, remember that weight is not the end all be all. It's not the only risk factor when we talk about heart disease. Physical activity can help strengthen that heart, put us in a better position health-wise. So someone that may have a higher weight, but gets the recommended physical activity, does things, could have a stronger heart than someone that does not do that. So that's the key thing to remember here. And when we talk about waist circumferencing and lowering our risk of heart disease, women should look at under 35 inches and men around under 40 inches as a general rule of thumb. So there's a lot of information shared about the background of heart disease and cardiovascular disease. And throughout this program, we're going to give you the knowledge. So all these topics that we listed that John talked about in the first part of this lecture, we're going to give you that knowledge. So it's your choice. You can make that choice. This is where it's in your hands. And this is what's so powerful about the things that we choose when we talk about our modifiable risk factors. Those are things we can control. So we just have to make that choice to do that. So we're giving you the knowledge. If you make that choice, you have the power to make that change. You have the power to make that change and make those behavior changes and then increase and improve your health. And that's the overall goal. So as a homework assignment throughout this course, we're gonna send you a physical activity log. So what you're gonna do is keep a physical activity log each week. You're gonna record any movements that you are making. So if you're not sitting down or laying down, write it down. If you go out and you just need a nice 5-minute walk just to get away from work for a second, write that down as physical activity. So anytime you're not standing or laying down and you're actually actively moving, put that down. Now, if you use Any fitness trackers, for instance, I have a Garmin watch, it records my activities. You can use that as well. We're aiming to get 150 minutes of moderate physical activity each week. Don't get discouraged if you can't get that every week. We're going to work on increasing that physical activity, but writing it down is an extra motivator. If you write it down and see how much or how little you're getting your physical activity, that can be used as a motivational tool to encourage you to do more. Or as you do more and you write more and you look at how far you've come from the beginning, that also can be a motivational tool. So we don't want you to be discouraged. Remember that any type of physical activity, any type of movement is better than no movement at all or no physical activity at all. You would otherwise be lapping yourself if you were just sitting on the couch. If you were otherwise just sitting on the couch, you're lapping yourself on the couch then. So remember that any type of physical activity is better than none. Remember that we all will send out a post-test or post-class assessment. So it's not long, it's not going to be difficult, but remember you have to complete that to make sure that we get your attendance for today. You'll receive a copy of this presentation as well as a link to the recording. So if you, for instance, you can't make anything live in the future, you'll have the option to watch it on demand and answer that post-class assessment as well. We'll hang out if there are any questions, but other than that, we look forward to seeing you next week.